Have you ever felt the exact moment when your house stopped being a home and turned into nothing more than walls holding a pain you never imagined you'd face? I ask, because that day, before anything happened, before any shouting, before any wound, I felt that the silence in my home was no longer the same. A heavy silence, the kind that pushes your soul into a dark corner you pretend not to see. A silence that announces, without mercy, that something precious is about to break. And when I say that, I'm not talking about dishes, furniture, or slamming doors. I'm talking about something much deeper, something that, once broken, not even time knows how to fix. I'm talking about trust, about hope, about the kind of love we once believed was unshakable, a mother's love. Before we go on, write in the comments where you're listening from, because this story isn't just mine. It belongs to many women, many homes, many corners of the world where a mother tries to hold everything together. Alone, tries to accept, tries to understand, tries to be strong, tries to stay whole, even when her own heart is tired of being stitched back together so many times. This story speaks to those who lived it, who are living it, or who fear it might happen to them. And it doesn't matter what city, state, or country you're in. All that matters is that you're here with me, right now, because that's how this story finds its meaning. When it reaches someone who knows exactly how heavy the silence is. When it warns of a coming storm. That day, the sun was already setting, but it still lit the living room with a glow that felt like it carried secrets. The house smelled of dinner ready on the stove, a simple smell of routine, of care, of a desperate attempt to keep some warmth in a home that had been growing cold for months. I remember every detail as if it happened yesterday. The tablecloth slightly crooked, a dog barking somewhere down the street, and the slow, steady rhythm of my heartbeat. Maybe I already sensed something was about to happen, but I didn't want to believe it. We rarely want to believe that pain comes from inside, that pain wears the face of someone we love, that pain can come from the hands we once held, once fed, once guided and protected. He walked into the room with firm steps, but they weren't the firm steps of a confident man. They were the steps of someone carrying anger, hurt, confusion. His eyes didn't meet mine right away, and that alone said more than words. A mother knows her child's gaze in any phase of life, in any situation, even when they try to hide. I felt that his eyes were carrying something dark, a weight he didn't know how to turn into words. And even sensing all of that, my instinct as a mother tried to justify it, tried to minimize it, tried to believe it was just a rough day. A mother always tries to believe, but there was a tension in the air too strong to ignore, a tension that crawled across the walls, across the floor, across the doorway, through the air that felt thicker than usual. In that moment, before any words were spoken, I already felt the presence of a deep wound, even if it hadn't revealed itself yet. Sometimes the body senses what the heart fights desperately to deny, and I sensed it. I felt a pain that hadn't happened yet, but was already breathing in front of me, waiting for the right moment to show its face. I walked toward him with that calmness only someone who has suffered deeply knows how to carry. A calmness not born from peace, but from experience. A calmness that tries to keep everything from falling apart at once. I asked if he was okay, but the question came out more fragile than I intended. It came out like a plea for him to tell me something that would ease my heart, something that would bring back the son I once knew. But he answered with a silence that cut through me like a knife, a silence harsher than anything he could have said out loud. That's when I noticed the way he was breathing, short, tense, as if he was holding something inside that was about to explode, and that look, finally lifted to meet mine, held a mix of pain and fury I had never seen before, a mix that needed no translation, because sometimes what hurts isn't the word. It's the look that carries it, the look that accuses, the look that abandons. Still, I tried. I tried to start a conversation, tried to ease the tension, tried to remember his smile when he was a child, tried to bring back the boy who ran through the house calling me Mom with that pure, innocent glow. I tried to use every bit of love I had, as if love alone could erase what was coming. But love, no matter how strong, sometimes loses to life, or to circumstances, or to choices the heart doesn't understand. He finally spoke, and the words that came out of his mouth were not the kind that fade with time. No matter how many years pass, he said things no mother should ever hear, words that cut my soul in ways even. Time doesn't know how to heal. Heavy words, words dripping with contempt, words soaked in accusations that I had failed, that I wasn't enough, that I was the weight he wanted to tear out of his life. And every sentence felt like an invisible shove, an attempt to push me away, to hurt me on purpose. Sometimes the world teaches children to wound the very mothers who loved them the most, and they don't always realize the damage they're causing. As he spoke, I felt the ground beneath me shifting, not physically, but emotionally. I felt myself being pulled out of a place I had built with so much effort, a home, a space of love, a story of sacrifice, and yet I stayed. Not because I lacked the courage to walk away, but because I had too much love. A mother's love is sometimes our greatest strength and our greatest weakness. The last light of the day faded, and the room grew darker, and in that soft darkness, I realized pain has a smell, a texture, a presence. Pain born inside a home weighs more than any other, because it carries memories, expectations, promises that were never spoken but always felt. And in that exact moment, I felt something inside me breaking little by little. But I couldn't show it. Not then. Not to him. Not in front of someone so lost in his own confusion. I took a deep breath, trying to hold my soul together inside my chest. And as he continued throwing words that tore me apart from the inside, I kept thinking one thing. How did we get here? How did the child I once carried, the child I protected from so many storms, become the storm inside my home? How does a mother's love become the target of her own child's rage? How does the silence of a home turn into something so dangerous? I knew something was wrong, but I never imagined the wound would come from the one I loved most. The thought echoed inside me like a painful whisper, and the moment that thought took shape, I realized the day was ending, but the night ahead would be much longer. A night where everything I believed would be tested. A night where I would learn that the pain of a physical blow is nothing compared to the emotional one that comes before it, because before the hand rises, the heart has already fallen. And at that moment, exactly there, the air changed again, heavier, colder, scarier, something that warned me that what was coming would be bigger than any word spoken so far. And I felt it before I saw it, before I heard it, before I understood it, because a mother's body recognizes danger before the mind is ready to accept it. And it's here, right here, that the story truly begins. The most painful part, the deepest part, the part no one wants to live, the part so many women hide, the part that, even against my will, changed my life forever. And as I tell you this, I want you to stay with me, because what comes next is not just about pain, it's about revelation, it's about truth. It's about something that feels impossible to forgive, and yet, somehow, it transformed everything inside me in ways I never imagined. And before we go on, breathe with me, because what comes next isn't light, and it needs to be heard slowly, without distraction, without interruption, because this is when the night falls. This is when silence becomes rupture. This is when the hand rises, and this is when the soul tries to survive the impact that was coming. When I close my eyes and go back in time, back to that afternoon before the silence turned into a warning, I can still see my little boy running through the house, tripping over his own feet, laughing as if the whole world were too small to hold so much joy. He had a way of looking at me that warmed even the days when I barely had food on the table. A sincere, pure glow, one of those only a child untouched by life's harshness can carry in their eyes. It was that glow that made me wake up early, go to bed late, and walk the same exhausting paths day after day to make sure he had what I never had. There was my reason, my hope, my strength, and it was for him that I learned to swallow my tears and smile even when my chest felt too tight to hold anything else. I remember the first time he got sick. I spent the whole night awake, a cold cloth on his forehead, my body tired, but my heart steady, because a mother doesn't give up on what she loves. In moments like that, we don't think about ourselves. We only think about protecting. And that night, looking at that small, fragile boy, I made a silent promise. As long as I breathed, he would never be alone. I didn't know the world would find ways to pull him away from me, and I didn't know that one day I would be fighting not against sickness, but against the emotional distance he would create on his own. On the hard days, when money didn't stretch, I would cut food from my own plate, but never from his. Many times, I went to work with an empty stomach, but he always went to school fed. Many times, my shoes were so worn that I could feel the ground beneath them, but he always had a decent pair when he needed one. And if anyone asked why, I wouldn't hesitate, because I'm a mother. And motherhood, especially for women like me, is a kind of love that learns to survive under any weight. It is resilience. It is sacrifice. It is faith. It is the kind of giving no one sees, but that builds someone else's future. I remember the first time he called me my warrior. He was just a child, but he already understood that I was his shield. Hearing that planted a courage in me I didn't even know I possessed. Courage to face long days, to accept work no one else wanted, to hold on to my dignity with both hands even when life tried to tear it away from me. I carried my son in my arms, but he never knew how often I leaned on him, just to keep going. When he smiled, I breathed easier. When he hugged me, everything was worth it. And when he grew older, when he started carving his own path, I believed that bond, the invisible tie that held us together, would be eternal. But time has a cruel way of testing what we build with such care. I began noticing little changes in him, changes that at first looked like nothing more than the rush of youth, life moving too fast, new influences barging in without knocking. He no longer talked to me the way he used to, no longer shared secrets, no longer sought my advice. I tried not to take it personally, tried to believe it was just a phase. Every mother tells herself that so her heart won't break too soon, but there was something more. Something between us that I couldn't name, a distance that didn't ask permission, one that settled quietly, day after day. A distance I tried to shrink with simple questions, with affection, with warm meals waiting on the table, with the kind of love that refuses to give up. But for some reason, everything I offered seemed to matter less than before, as if my love had shrunk, as if my presence had lost value. I asked myself, in whispers, whether I had made a mistake somewhere along the way, whether I had failed without realizing it. Some mothers know this pain, the pain of watching a child drift away without explanation, the pain of feeling love change shape, the pain of sensing something breaking slowly and not knowing how to stop it. Comment. I understand that pain, if you felt this, so I know this story isn't being told in vain. I tried to remember every detail from the past, as if digging through old memories could help me understand what was happening now. I remembered him falling asleep with his head on my lap, remembered the way he wrapped his tiny fingers around mine, remembered the times he said he wanted to protect me when he grew up. It was almost ironic to think about that, because life doesn't always keep the promises made in innocence. I gave everything I had, and even what I didn't, to raise a man of character, a man of responsibility, a man who would recognize who stood by him in the hardest days. And for many years, I believed I had succeeded, but something changed in a way I couldn't follow. His life took turns I couldn't understand, made choices I never imagined, behaved in ways that barely resembled the boy I raised. And even then, even watching those changes unfold, I still believed in him. I kept waiting for the day he would sit beside me again, call me Mom, with that gentle tone that calmed my heart. I waited for the return of that childlike glow, that simple affection, that deep connection that once felt impossible to break. I waited, and waiting, when it comes to a child, becomes almost a duty of the heart. But the truth is, not every distance begins with screaming. Sometimes it begins with silence, a silence that grows, settles, takes over the house, the gestures, the half-finished conversations. And the more I tried to get close, the more it felt like he built walls I couldn't climb. I felt outside of his life, as if he had locked a door and forgotten I was standing on the other side. And even then, I stayed. Because mothers stay, because mothers insist, because mothers love in a way that doesn't retreat easily. I told myself it was just a phase, that things would get better soon, that he'd return to being my boy again. But deep inside, something in me knew a shadow was growing. A shadow that didn't begin on the day of the argument. It had been creeping through the cracks of our story long before that, quietly, slowly, while I was trying not to see it. And that's why the moment of the fall hurts so much, because you remember everything you built before, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every battle fought alone, every gesture of care, every seed of hope planted. The pain doesn't begin on the day everything collapses. The pain begins in the contrast between what was and what it became, between the past that holds you and the present that wounds you. I had no idea in that darkening room that his hand would one day fall upon me. But when a bond begins to break, the heart always feels it first, and mine was already tired of holding alone the weight of a relationship slipping through my fingers. And it is exactly that past, this love built brick by brick, tear by tear, that makes what came next so hard to accept. Because when the wound comes from outside, we defend ourselves. But when it comes from inside, from someone who once slept against your chest, the fall is deeper. And it's in that depth that my story continues, exactly at the point where life decides to test how much a mother can bear before she breaks completely. I realized the change hadn't happened overnight. It arrived the way a storm arrives. Long before anyone notices the first raindrops, it's already forming in the sky. That's how it was in my home. Small clouds, small signs, small silences that, when added together, began to signal that something in my son's heart was drifting away from mine. At first, I tried not to worry. A mother always tries not to worry. But the truth is, I could already feel the cold wind slipping through the cracks of our relationship. I started noticing that he came home different. It wasn't just exhaustion, and it wasn't just youth running too fast. It was another kind of energy, a shadow he carried on his shoulders, a weight that didn't match the boy who once hugged me and told me I was the most important woman in his life. Now, when I called for him, his tone had changed. It was shorter, sharper, distant, small answers that cut more than he realized. He didn't notice it, but every word he spoke felt like another step away from me. And I, trying to hold our bond together, stayed quiet, swallowed the discomfort, swallowed the hurt, swallowed the feeling that I no longer fit in his life. The new friends appeared the way weeds appear in a yard, quiet, persistent, spreading too fast. He started hanging around people I had never seen before, people who laughed too loudly, who mocked everything, who seemed to encourage a kind of rebellion that didn't belong to my son. People who planted ideas in his mind, ideas that fed his pride, shaped his worldview, and chipped away at the innocence I spent years trying to protect. And even though I didn't want to judge, something in their conversations pushed him further from me. I could feel my home changing, even though I hadn't done anything to cause it. When he met the woman who eventually became his partner, I felt something I couldn't explain. I'm not saying she was responsible for everything. That wouldn't be fair. But there was something in the way she looked at him, as if she wanted to shape him into her own image. After he got involved with her, his tone with me changed again. It carried impatience, irritation, authority, a tone that seemed to tell me, without words, that I was being left behind, that my voice no longer mattered, that my place in his life was shrinking. I began paying attention to the small details. He would come home and not greet me. He'd walk past me as if I were part of the furniture, as if I were something that existed out of habit. When I asked if he had eaten, he responded like he was being attacked. When I tried to start a simple conversation, he became defensive. And every exaggerated reaction made it clear that his coldness wasn't temporary. It was becoming permanent. Something was hardening inside him. And whatever it was, it didn't include me. Comment if you've ever lived a distance like this. Only if you want to. Share. Sometimes writing something as simple as, "I lived this," helps more than we realize. The humiliations began small, so small that any mother afraid of losing her child would rather pretend not to notice. An eye roll, an impatient sigh, a short remark coded in contempt, a mocking tone disguised as a joke, a decision made without involving me when we had always been a team inside that house. I swallowed everything, because a mother who loves learns to swallow a lot. She swallows to avoid fights. She swallows to avoid pushing the child even further away. She swallows because she believes it's just a phase, that it will pass, that the child will mature, that life will teach what she no longer knows how to say. But it wasn't passing. In fact, each day felt worse. The house felt colder, the atmosphere heavier. Even the objects seemed to lose their shine, as if they sensed the joy had left our home. Even my own body felt it. I found myself walking slower, breathing deeper, avoiding any kind of friction, like someone trying to cross a minefield without making noise, because in his presence, everything felt like a risk. He no longer called me Mom with affection. When he spoke to me, it felt like a stranger was inside my home. And the most painful part was that I remembered exactly the child he used to be. The child who ran into my arms, who held my hand with absolute trust, who protected me from his own fears. Now, the fear belonged to me. Fear of losing him. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of becoming a source of irritation. Fear that the boy I raised had disappeared inside a man I didn't recognize anymore. I noticed pride beginning to take over him. A pride that grew too fast, like a wall built between us. He no longer accepted advice, no longer accepted opinions, no longer accepted conversation. Everything I said was taken as criticism. Everything I did seemed to irritate him. And the more he closed himself off, the more I tried to find some crack to reach through, hoping to rescue our bond. But with every attempt I made, it felt like he stepped back even further. Then came the emotional aggression, first in his eyes, then in his tone, then in his words. Words that didn't need to be shouted to hurt more than a slap. Words that quietly told me I was no longer needed, no longer respected, that I had become a burden. He said I interfered too much, when all I did was care. He said I was dramatic, when I was simply hurt. He said I suffocated him, when all I wanted was to be heard. And so the storm took shape, not with sudden winds, but with steady ones that blew, chilled, and wore things down. I felt my home turning into a silent battlefield where I walked on invisible shards, trying to avoid any conflict that might break everything at once. And even without wanting to admit it, I knew something was very wrong. I knew the man who raised his voice at me wasn't the same boy I had raised with so much love. I knew that coldness didn't come from nowhere, and I knew that harshness didn't belong to him by nature. But no matter how much it hurt, I stayed. I remained steady, believing everything could be restored, that it could change, that if I held things together, if I stayed patient, if I kept loving him, somehow the warmth would return to our home. Maybe that was my greatest mistake, or maybe it was my greatest act of love. Sometimes the two are indistinguishable, and it was exactly in that moment when the house felt cold, the air felt heavy, and my heart felt tired, that I began noticing even clearer signs that the storm wasn't forming anymore. It was already inside my door. And when I realized that, I still didn't know the worst part was yet to come. I didn't know the emotional aggression was only the beginning. I didn't know that coldness would open the door to something much more painful, something that, even today, I can't explain without feeling the shadow of that night creeping over me as if it were yesterday. That night began like so many others, me walking through the house, trying to maintain peace in places where only I could still see it. I had spent the entire day feeling the heavy air, that same air that warns you when something has crossed an unseen line and is about to explode. The house felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in on me, pressing, warning me to prepare myself for something unavoidable. And even then, I tried to stay calm, not because I felt peace, but because I knew that if I fell apart, nothing else in that house would stand. He came in carrying a world of frustrations inside his chest. The sound of the door slamming still echoes in my memory, like a late warning of what was to come. It wasn't just anger. It was accumulation, unresolved disappointments, influences that planted pride in his heart, resentments I didn't even know existed. And before I could say anything to soften the atmosphere, he was already armed, not with his hands, but with his words. And sometimes, that is the most dangerous weapon of all. He looked at me as if I were the root of every problem in his life. A hard look, the kind that tears through the soul before a single word is spoken. And when he finally opened his mouth, it felt like the ground disappeared beneath my feet. The words came fast, sharp, cutting, as if every syllable were a calculated strike aimed exactly where it would hurt the most. He said things I never imagined hearing from a son, things that didn't come from a moment of irritation, but from a wounded heart, shaped by the wrong influences, hurting without knowing how to ask for help. I listened without interrupting, not because I agreed, but because I knew that if I said a word at that moment, anything I said would be used against me. He said I didn't let him live, that I was a burden, that I got in the way, that I was the cause of his mistakes, that I had never done anything right. And those words, spoken out loud, were more painful than any. Mark a hand could leave, because what wounds the soul doesn't heal like skin, and what comes from your own blood carries a weight the world could never lift. Comment: I've felt this pain if you've lived something similar. Sometimes writing releases what the heart keeps trapped. I tried to stay calm, even as I felt my dignity being crushed with every sentence. I took deep breaths because I knew that if I let my pain speak louder, everything would get worse. I tried to understand where so much bitterness came from, so much resentment, so much disdain, because the boy I raised wasn't the one standing in front of me. This was someone shaped by life, by anger, by the world, by people who didn't want me around, by a partner who fed his ego while erasing my worth. He said he didn't need me, that I was too much, that I ruined everything, that I didn't know how to stay quiet, that I just got in the way. Words no child should say to a mother, but that night they came like a flood. I felt each one landing not in my ears, but on my history, on my sacrifices, on my devotion. All the nights spent holding him through fevers, all the sacrifices I made to pay bills he never knew the cost of, all of that being trampled by phrases that sounded rehearsed, spoken by someone who no longer recognized my value. I didn't cry, not because I didn't want to, but because crying, in that moment, felt like giving victory to the disdain. I held myself together like someone trying to stop cracks from spreading through the entire house, because every time he raised his voice, I felt a piece of our story fracture, a piece of our relationship collapse, a part of my heart being pushed to its breaking point, and I asked myself only once, quietly inside, where did I lose my son? His voice kept rising, harsher, heavier, loaded with accusations. He said his life would be better without me, said I had never been enough, that I did more harm than good, that I didn't know how to raise anyone, that I should stop pretending to be a mother. And the emotional impact was so strong, I had to hold on to the table to keep from collapsing, because no one prepares a mother to hear from her own child that she is nothing, that she means nothing, that she was a mistake. These sentences don't just wound, they scar. And the worst part was seeing in his eyes that he believed what he was saying, not because it was true, but because someone had poisoned his mind against me. Someone planted the idea that I was the obstacle, that I was the problem, that I was the burden. And that felt like watching the entire house sink beneath my feet, because when love is distorted by outside influences, truth loses ground and lies gain strength, and he was strong in those lies. Comment: words hurt if you understand this kind of pain. I tried to keep my posture, tried to breathe, tried not to step into the storm he was creating with his own voice, because I knew that if I reacted, if I answered with the same fire, we would lose everything. So I listened, even when listening meant shrinking, even when listening meant watching my entire past be thrown to the floor, even when listening meant being wounded in ways I never imagined. And just when I thought he had already crossed the line, he stepped closer to me. Up close, the words came even crueler, words that didn't just hurt. They ripped pieces of my dignity away. He said I had never been an example, that I meddled where I wasn't wanted, that I should get out of his life. And in that moment, something inside me cracked, not something visible, but I felt it, like a bridge I had spent years building collapsing in seconds right in front of me. And it was exactly then, at the height of the argument, that I noticed something strange in his eyes, as if the anger were taking over the space where love used to live. And I understood, in a silent realization, that this moment still wasn't the worst. He was on the edge of something deeper, darker, more painful than words could express. I felt it in my skin, the same way someone feels the air shift before a storm becomes a hurricane. And right there, exactly there, I knew what was coming next would be even more devastating. Because when words hit their limit, when they're no longer enough, when the pain can't escape through the mouth anymore, it looks for another way out. And even though I tried to push the thought away, I knew I was about to live something that would forever change the way I understood love, respect, and motherhood itself. He stood so close I could smell his rage, a sharp, heavy scent, as if every word he'd spoken had turned into something toxic filling the room. The silence between one sentence and the next wasn't just silence anymore. It was a threat, a warning, a space where everything I never wanted to face inside my home now had room to grow. I no longer saw my son standing before me. I saw a man consumed by blind pride, poisoned by the wrong people, carrying wounds he never learned how to handle, and now throwing them at me as if I were responsible for every fall he ever took. I remember the way he breathed, short, hot, almost panting, the kind of breath that comes right before something no one wants to witness. And even as I sensed his control slipping, I stayed still, not because I was strong, but because I knew that if I broke, he would fall even deeper. I didn't want to provoke him, didn't want to argue, didn't want to add fuel to the fire that was already burning everything around us. I just wanted to protect whatever thin thread was still holding us together. But the truth is, in that moment, any word I said would have been the match that lit the last fuse. The room felt smaller, as if the walls were closing in, trapping not just us, but our entire history inside that suffocating instant. The dim light from the kitchen lit half his face, and that lit half showed a man I didn't recognize. There was hardness, shame, a kind of desperation disguised as fury in someone who no longer knows how to turn back. He took a step toward me, and I took one back, not out of fear, but because I felt something slipping beyond control, something I had never seen in my son's eyes. And before I could say anything, before I could try to stop the storm rising inside him, he raised his hand, not slowly, not hesitating. He raised it like someone who had already crossed a line that should never be crossed. And in that second, in that exact movement, everything went silent. A silence so deep I could hear my own blood rushing through my veins, the sound of my breath trapped in my throat, the sound of my thoughts shattering into pieces, the invisible sound of a mother's love being tested in a way that hurts far more than any slap ever could. When his hand came toward my face, I didn't have time to defend myself, no time to think, no time to beg him to stop. The only thing that happened was the impact. A dry, cruel, quick impact. One. That didn't echo loudly in the room, but thundered inside my chest. A sound that echoed through my entire soul. I felt my body stumble to the side, felt the world spin for a moment, felt a strange heat rise along my skin, not from anger, but from disbelief. It was as if my mind refused to accept what my body had just felt, as if I were watching another woman in another home, in another life, suffer that violence. But it was me. It was my home. It was my son. Comment, strength, if this moment touched you. I didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't react. My body fell slowly, almost like someone had pressed the slow motion button on my life. First my knees gave way, then my fingers lost their strength, and when I touched the floor, I felt not only the physical impact, but the emotional weight of what it truly meant. It wasn't just his hand that had knocked me down. It was everything that came before it. Every cruel word, every cold stare, every sharp silence, every accumulated dismissal. I fell because of all of it. While I was still on the floor, struggling to breathe, I lifted my eyes to him. And in his eyes, I saw something strange. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't immediate regret. It was shock. The kind of shock that only appears when someone realizes they've crossed a line that should never be crossed. He stood frozen, rigid, as if he couldn't believe what he had just done, as if his own rage had moved his body before his conscience could stop it. I saw his eyes tremble for a second, saw his pride wrestling with fear, saw the child inside him trying to find space inside the man who no longer knew how to see me as his mother, saw an emotional confusion he couldn't hide. And for a moment, something inside him seemed ready to turn back, but the weight of his own ego kept his feet glued to the floor. I stayed on the ground, but there was a quiet strength inside me that kept me from falling apart completely. I felt pain. I felt humiliation. I felt an emptiness I had never felt before. An emptiness that is born when the person you love most becomes the person who wounds you the deepest. And nothing in this world prepares a mother for that. No woman should have to endure that. No heart should carry a mark like that. Comment, I didn't deserve that if this part reached your heart. I raised my hand to my face slowly, not to check the physical pain, but to try to understand what had just happened. It wasn't the impact of his hand that hurt. It was the collapse of everything I believed in. It was the breaking of a bond I thought was unbreakable. It was the cruel confirmation that something inside my son had been taken over by something he didn't know how to control. I didn't say anything. There were no words big enough to fit inside that moment. I just breathed deeply and stayed there for a few seconds, because getting up too quickly would mean pretending that pain didn't exist, and I needed to feel it, even if it hurt, to understand how far things had gone, to understand the size of the shadow that had entered my home that day. And as I tried to stand, with my body heavy and my heart even heavier, I realized that blow wasn't just a slap. It was a mark, a breaking point, a dividing line that would change everything that came after. Because from that moment on, nothing would be the same. Not for him, not for me, not for the home I built with so much love. And when I finally placed my hand on the floor to push myself up, I knew that what came next wouldn't be easy. I knew the physical pain would eventually fade, but that other pain, the silent, deep, intimate pain, that one would stay with me as I tried to figure out how to keep living after watching my own son cross a line that should never have been touched. I stayed there for a moment, hand pressed against the ground, trying to find strength where nothing felt solid anymore. The whole house felt still, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath with me. And in the middle of that heavy silence, I felt a heat rise through my face. Not the heat of anger, but the heat born when the soul tries to understand a pain the body hasn't processed yet. I couldn't remember the last time I had felt something so deep, so unexpected, so devastating. But there I was, on the floor of my own home, facing a reality I never imagined living. A mother never expects violence to come from within. A mother never expects the same hand she once held steady to teach first steps to be. The hand that knocks her down. I tried to stand slowly, because any sudden movement felt like it could shatter my dignity into pieces. First my knees trembled, then my hands searched for support the house no longer seemed able to give. And when I finally stood upright, I felt a tear fall on its own, without me calling for it, without me trying to stop it. A single tear, heavy, filled with the kind of pain no mother should carry. It wasn't a tear of weakness. It was a tear of truth, the raw truth, that sometimes love gets struck by the very person who should protect it. He remained still, looking at me with an expression that seemed to have lost its focus, as if his body had acted before his mind caught up. His eyes held confusion, hurt pride, a desperate attempt to maintain a posture that no longer held. And for a brief moment, I saw the boy he once was, trying to reach the man standing there, but failing. It was as if two versions of him fought inside the same chest, and neither knew how to step out without causing more destruction. I took a careful breath, the kind you take when you're trying to keep your soul from slipping out of your body. And only then did I manage to look directly at him, not with hatred, not with resentment, not with a desire to return the pain. I looked at him in the only way my heart still knew how to look, as a mother. And it was in that look, hurt but steady, that I found the only sentence that could leave my mouth in that moment. A short, simple sentence carrying everything I felt, everything I feared, everything I didn't yet understand. My son, what have they done to you? That phrase didn't come as accusation. It came as mourning, as someone witnessing a soul being overtaken by something that wasn't born inside it. Because I knew that hand he raised wasn't his. It wasn't the boy I knew. It wasn't the son who held my worries like toys in his small palms. It wasn't the man I tried to raise with values, respect, faith, responsibility. That hand was not his. It belonged to his pain, to his anger, to the influences that reshaped him when I could no longer protect him from everything. It belonged to a hollow place inside him he tried to fill with pride, aggression, and distance. Comment, I felt this part, if this pain reached you. He didn't say anything, but his silence said everything. It said he knew something had crossed a line. It said he was trying to understand how he'd gotten there. It said his conscience was beginning to feel the weight of a hand that should never have risen. And that silence, in that moment, was louder than any shout he had ever thrown at me. Because shouting cracks the air, but silence breaks you from the inside. I could have screamed. I could have tried to make him feel even a fraction of what I felt. I could have thrown harsh words back, could have returned pain with pain. But I chose not to. Not because I was too strong, but because I knew that when someone raises a hand against their own mother, the heavier weight doesn't stay on the skin of the one who is struck. It settles on the spirit of the one who struck, and I refused to add to that weight. In that moment, I understood something I had never seen with such clarity. The violence hadn't destroyed me. It had revealed the strength I had always carried, even when I couldn't see it myself. The strength of a mother who refuses to be shaped by bitterness. The strength of a woman who has walked through too much pain to let one fall. Define her story. The ancestral strength that lives in so many women who survive what should have broken them. I stood there in front of him with a calm that wasn't calm. It was resistance. With a posture that wasn't pride. It was courage. With a tear that wasn't defeat. It was humanity. And in that moment, I knew nothing would be the same again. Not for me, not for him, and especially not for the bond that once existed between us. But I also knew that night wasn't ending there. That moment was only the beginning of a shift that wouldn't happen quickly, but one that began exactly there, in the silence that followed the pain. A silence that carried more than suffering. It carried revelation. And as I breathed deeply, trying to hold my soul together, I knew the story wasn't over. I knew what would come after that silence would require even more strength, more truth, more courage, because it was from that moment forward that I would discover not just how to move on, but who I would become. After violence tried to silence me, when the house finally went quiet again, and the night seemed to swallow the little bit of light that was left, I sat alone at the edge of my bed, feeling the weight of my own breath. It felt as if every inhale pulled a piece of that pain inside me, and every exhale pushed the world farther away. I didn't know how much time had passed since the moment his hand struck me, but it felt like my entire soul had aged within minutes. The physical pain was almost irrelevant. What burned wasn't on my skin. It was in my spirit. What throbbed wasn't my face. It was the memory. What hurt wasn't my body. It was the story we had built to arrive at that moment. I sat there for a long time, staring into nothing, as if the silence were the only thing holding me together. And in that empty space, my thoughts began to run wild, searching for answers, for meaning, for any part of myself that hadn't been shattered. It's in moments like that we discover how alone we truly are with our pain. No matter how many people we have around us, no one feels what we feel. No one sees inside our chest. No one carries the same emotional weight. And alone in that room, I began to understand that my journey from that point on wouldn't depend on whether he came back, or whether he apologized, or whether he recognized the wound he caused. It depended on me, only on me. Comment, I understand, if this part spoke to you. I closed my eyes, and for the first time that night, aloud. The memories to come. Not the memories of the blow, but the memories from before. The memories of the little boy who ran around the living room, who hugged me tightly, who held my hand to cross the street. I remembered the first time he called me Mom, the first time he got sick and slept in my arms, the first time he looked at me with admiration because I solved a problem he thought was impossible. Those memories came like small flashes of light, trying to brighten a heart that felt completely dark. I let them come because they reminded me of who I was before that night. And as those memories surrounded me, I began to realize something no mother ever wants to admit. Love doesn't prevent pain. Love doesn't protect from everything. Love doesn't save every time. Love doesn't guarantee you'll be spared by the very person you love most. And even so, love is inevitable. Love is the current that keeps us moving forward even after we've been knocked down. Love is what holds the soul when the body collapses. I realized that if I allowed that pain to take over, I would lose not only my son, but myself. So I began speaking silently to my own heart, not out loud, but inside my soul. A conversation only someone with a broken heart understands. I asked myself what I would do with that pain, whether I would let it turn into resentment, whether I would let it take root inside me, whether I would feed it until it became a shadow that followed me for the rest of my life, or whether I would choose something different. I knew either path would require strength, but one of them required courage, and I had suffered too much to hand my life over to suffering. It was in that moment that I understood something I had never understood so deeply. Forgiveness isn't for the one who hurts us. Forgiveness is the key that frees the one who carries the pain. Forgiveness is the door that makes space for the soul to breathe. Forgiveness doesn't erase what happened, doesn't remove the mark, doesn't undo the blow, but it prevents the pain from becoming a permanent resident in the heart. And if I carried that moment inside me, if I let my son's hand live within me, it would destroy me slowly. Not physically, but emotionally, spiritually. And I wasn't willing to give my story to that. Comment, forgiveness frees, if that truth spoke to you. I wasn't ready to say out loud that I forgave him, because forgiveness doesn't grow from a sudden decision. It grows from a process, from understanding, from surrender. But I was ready to take the first step. And the first step wasn't forgiving my son. It was deciding not to carry his hand inside me. It was deciding that his violence wouldn't become the lens through which I viewed my life. It was deciding that pain wouldn't be the place I settled into. I knew I could choose between being trapped or being free. And for the first time that night, after so much darkness, I chose freedom. I sat up straighter, wiped the tear that insisted on falling, and whispered to myself, softly but with a strength I didn't know I had, I will not carry his hand inside me. I will release this pain before it destroys me. And when I said that, something inside me shifted. It wasn't immediate peace. It wasn't instant healing. It was only the beginning. A breath, a sliver of light sneaking through a window still closed, but it was light. And I needed that light to keep breathing, to keep living, to keep being who I am. I stood up, still feeling the ache in my body and the heaviness in my heart, but there was new strength inside me, a silent, mature, ancestral strength that so many women carried before me, a strength that doesn't scream, doesn't rage, doesn't strike back. It simply exists, firm, whole, unbreakable, the kind of strength the world tries to destroy, but that always rises again. And I knew, as I walked toward the dark living room, that my story wasn't finished. I knew the next step would be even harder. I knew facing the next day would demand more courage than facing that night. I knew the wound would still bleed, but for the first time since the blow, I breathed with the feeling that I wasn't falling. I was rising, and it was from that quiet place, between pain and release, that my journey would continue. The days that followed that night seemed to move slowly, as if time itself were watching me from afar, testing my ability to keep going. The silence in the house was no longer the wounded silence from before. It was a silence of suspension, of waiting, of something that didn't yet have a name, but that I felt approaching. I did my chores, breathed slowly, let my mind rest in the safest corners of my faith, and tried not to revisit the moment when I fell to the floor. Not out of denial, but out of choice. I was learning to release the pain, not feed it. Comment, I'm here, if you're still with me at this point. In those days, I felt a transformation happening inside me. It wasn't a sudden miracle, but those small, internal shifts that happen when the heart decides it's done bleeding and begins, slowly, to heal. I whispered to myself while cleaning the house, making my coffee, folding clothes, and each simple gesture became a way of reconnecting with my own soul. I repeated what I had decided that dawn. I would not carry his hand inside me. I would not let that strike become the weight that pushed me down every day. I would rise. I would breathe. I would survive with dignity. Yet, even while rebuilding my spirit, one question lingered in the air. And him? Where was he? How was he? What was happening inside that chest that once held the innocence of a little boy and now hid the guilt of a man lost within himself? I had no answers. The only sign of his presence was his absence. The kind of absence that weighs, the kind that speaks even when silent, the kind that crawls through the corners of the house when you're alone. 3 days passed like that. 3 days without the door opening, without the sound of his footsteps echoing through the house, with the walls, silent witnesses to what happened, seeming to ask whether he would return. I didn't know. There was no way to know. but something inside me whispered that his silence wasn't escape, it was preparation. Sometimes repentance needs room to be born. Sometimes the conscience needs time to find the courage to come back. And then, on the fourth day, almost at sunset, when the sky turned that burnt gold color that always reminded me of the strength of the women who came before me, I heard the front door open slowly. It wasn't a loud sound. It wasn't a normal sound. It was hesitant, almost asking permission to exist. My heart sped up as if it wanted to run to the door, but my feet stayed firmly planted where they were. I knew that moment needed to happen at the right pace, in the right time, with the right soul. He walked in slowly, without noise. His posture was different, as if his body had collapsed, and he was trying to gather the pieces. He didn't look at me right away. He stood still for a moment, breathing deeply, like someone searching for strength to face the truth. And when he finally lifted his eyes, I saw it. It wasn't anger. It wasn't arrogance. It was the broken look of a son who knew he had gone too far. A son carrying shame in his breath, guilt on his shoulders, repentance in his eyes. He took 2 steps toward me, but stopped on the third. It was as if something inside him locked up, as if he feared my reaction, and I understood. He thought I would reject him, thought I would push him away, thought my pain had turned into punishment. And it was that very idea that filled my eyes with tears, not from sadness, but from compassion. Because few things are harder for a child than returning to a mother after hurting her. Comment. He came back because it hurt, if you understand this moment. He tried to speak, but his voice failed. The first word came out broken, almost lifeless, as if it were part of a confession too heavy to carry. He said my name, then Mom, but the word came out trembling, as if it had forgotten its way after so many days carrying storms inside him. And when he finally spoke, the words came like held-back rain. Forgive me. I don't know what happened to me. I don't know what came over me. I failed. I failed you. I failed myself. I took a deep breath because that apology wasn't light. It was loaded with everything he had held in during those silent days. Each syllable carried the weight of guilt he didn't know how to bear. And there I was, watching my son tremble in front of me, understanding the depth of that moment. He didn't need me to condemn him. He was already condemned by his own heart. I took a step toward him, then another, and when I stood close enough to hear his breath shaking, I did what my spirit told me, what my faith demanded, what my love had always known how to do. I embraced him, without hesitation, without fear, without needing perfect words. I embraced him as a mother. I embraced him as a woman who knows her wounds and knows the power of refusing to let violence define her. And he collapsed in my arms like a child finally letting his guilt escape. His cry wasn't just remorse. It was a cry filled with years of hidden pain, wrong choices, bad influences, pride now melting like wet paper. He cried like someone standing in front of the only person capable of holding his broken pieces without judgment. And I held him tight because I knew that at that moment, the embrace wasn't for me. It was for his soul, for his conscience, for his redemption. And in the middle of that trembling breath, that tangled cry, that reconciliation only true love can withstand, I said the words born not from pain, but from the truth I discovered in my own inner journey. I whispered, steady and sure, with the certainty of someone who had already chosen freedom. When your hand fell on me, my heart almost fell too, but my forgiveness, that fell on you first. When he heard that, his body collapsed completely. It was as if the chains holding him finally snapped, chains of guilt, of shame, of self-hatred. I felt it in the weight of his body against mine, that those words had reached the right place, that place where regular words don't go, that place where the soul needs touch, truth, and light. I felt his pain turning into relief. I felt my own pain turning into release. And in the middle of that tangled cry, that trembling breath, that fragile reconciliation, I understood we were witnessing the beginning of healing, a healing that doesn't erase the past, but makes room for the future, a healing that doesn't deny the fall, but chooses to rise, a healing that doesn't depend on the other person's acknowledgement, only on our choice to be free. And as he continued crying on my shoulder, I knew that wouldn't be our last conversation, There was much still to be said, much to be repaired, much to be rebuilt. But that moment was the beginning, the restart, the point where pain gives way to hope and love finds a way to breathe again. After everything I lived, I learned that forgiveness doesn't erase the memory, but it keeps it from turning into poison. It doesn't rewrite the past, but it frees the soul to breathe again. The pain exists, I won't deny it. It marks us, it weighs, it tests us, but I've learned it doesn't have to rule our whole life. It only reigns where we allow it. And that day, after facing a hand that should never have risen, I chose not to turn my wound into a prison. I chose to free my spirit before anger had the chance to shape me. I understood that children fail, mothers fail too, and life eventually shows us that love isn't made only of easy moments. Sometimes love is made of unseen falls, unnoticed strength, and silent choices that save a heart from losing itself completely. I learned I can't control anyone's path, nor stop those I love from making mistakes, but I can decide what I do with every scar life leaves on me. I can decide whether they knock me down or lift me up. And in the end, one truth remains unshakable. No hand should ever strike a mother, but if one ever does, may her heart be stronger than the ignorance that harmed her. Because that's how we get through the darkness. That's how we honor who we are. That's how we turn what was a fall into the seed for the next step. Now take a deep breath with me. Let this story settle in your heart the way it needs to. And when you're ready, go to the next video appearing on your screen. It carries another truth from the matriarchs, another story full of strength and revelation, another open window into the feminine soul so many try to silence. It's not a continuation of this story, but it is another necessary voice, another flame, another secret that deserves to be heard. Go on. Your journey doesn't end here. The next story is already waiting for you.